my friend. Coach Brad, Matt, Lee, Esquires all, and other members of the team that cannot be here today. We've got Bill, and a few others are as yet not named. I am here not necessarily just for me. I am here for the other independent journalists that were there on January 6th doing their job, that were not there to riot, that were not there to inflict harm on law enforcement or do property damage, or to walk around the building and chanting and making even their voices heard. But for those guys who have been charged and convicted and in some prison for the very activities that I did that day, unfortunately for those guys, they did not have behind them a team that has come and rallied behind me of that quality. Unfortunately, they have not had as well a news organization of the size of the bullhorn voice of Blaze Media to back them up. And so I'm here for them today, first and foremost. I want to talk about, first of all, the difference in journalism today and what it was and what they now expect it to be, and the way that the government still portrays it in trial as this arcane beast that you have to work for some hallowed organization like the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Associated Press or UPI or CNN or MSNBC, or you're not qualified as a journalist. You have to have a specific license or a designation or a certificate or a badge or a press pass of some sort in order for your voice to be valid. See, that's the old world. As it is today, you're somebody like myself who 3 years ago had a Facebook following of 40,000 followers. That's larger, you understand, than most small town newspapers. As a matter of fact, in those days, before Facebook started suppressing speech and throttling our reach because of the COVID restrictions that were happening at the time, my articles to 40,000 subscribers were seen by average of 150,000 people, sometimes over 1 million, depending upon whether they went viral or not. That's the new media. That's where we're at today. So you can't come to us, Department of Justice. You can't come to me, FBI. You can't come to me, Assistant U.S. Attorney, and look at me in a trial and denigrate me the way that you did to J.D. Rivera from Pensacola, or the way you denigrated Stephen Horn from Raleigh, North Carolina in their trials. You belittle them for their journalistic efforts, for their voice, for what they did, because it's not the same anymore. You've got this old, archaic view, and we're going to stop that from this point forward, going forward, if you decide to come against me in court. We're going to put that back on you, and we're going to educate you on what the new media is. Because while we're growing, and our voices are growing, and millions of people are following our blogs, and our Substacks, and our locals, etc., Washington Post is laying people off by the hundreds. The old media is dying. We're the new voice. Looks different, sounds different. You may not like what we have to say, but we still have the First Amendment to protect us. Real quickly, I just want to go back to a couple of these guys I mentioned already. I want to talk about J.D. Rivera, Pensacola. He was the first person in the Panhandle of Florida to be arrested for January 6th crime. He had an agent show up at his doorstep early in the morning in the raid and put the red dots on his family, his children, his wife, and visit his family as well, which was taken there with him. What was his crime? He was a professional, or is a professional videographer, photojournalist, who showed up at the Capitol that day with his big professional gear, and then he followed the story where the story went. The story went through a broken window. He and another journalist who submitted his story to the New Yorker by the name of Luke Mogelson, they went through the same broken window. Luke went through with his cell phone. In fact, he famously said in the videos he captured inside the Senate of the QAnon shaman praying, singing, and chanting in the Senate chamber, he said, "I used my cell phone as a journalist notebook." JD was there with his big professional gear, contracted by a television station out of Mobile, Alabama. JD didn't chant. He didn't say USA, USA. He didn't say stop the steal. He didn't say whose house, our house. No chance whatsoever. And he and Luke basically paralleled each other through the Capitol that day. Luke submitted his story to the New Yorker entitled "Among can't wait to take this film that he has and put it on the air. JD gets home, never hears from the television station again. As I mentioned before, these individuals with long rifles, red dots, show up from the government, these government agencies, and they arrest him and take him away. They charge him, not with felonies, not with violent insurrection. They charge him with a glorified trespassing charge. And he gets 4 misdemeanors. He says, well, if you're not going to charge Luke Mogelson, then I'm going to go to trial and I'm going to let my voice be heard and I'm going to defend myself. This is selective prosecution at its best. And that's what I'm going to do. And he went to trial. He was convicted. Months later, he was sentenced to 8 months in prison. Rather than sending him to a minimum security camp just outside of his home in Pensacola where his family could visit him, they sent him to a medium security facility in Georgia, where the first thing they did is they threw this misdemeanor defendant, journalist, into solitary confinement for 2 months. He got 4 days of sunshine in his first 2 months in prison. 4 days. When he was released into the general population, he then had to convince the violent felons who were there, the professional criminals, that he was only a misdemeanor defendant because they said to him, you're lying. Misdemeanor defendants don't come to this jail. They don't send them to prison. We know, we're pros. This is what we do for a living. We don't misdemeanor defendants only. Well, you are if you're a January 6th defendant. That's how you treat it. Thankfully, JD's back at home with his family. Stephen Horn, young independent journalist, was only 22 years old on January 6th. He had been acquiring and accumulating press passes and badges for events he had been covering all the way back when he was 16 years old. And I've seen, he's not smart, I've seen the motions that his attorneys filed on a selective prosecution basis to show the court that he had a history of doing journalism, and that was why he was there that day. So here's what happened. When they filed that motion, the judge, a Trump supporter, Trump-appointed judge, by the way, Judge Kelly, denied him and his defense team the right to show his history of journalism to that jury. He was not allowed to show him those press badges that he had accumulated since he was 16 years old. And instead, those prosecutors belittled him, denigrated him, and absolutely destroyed any possibility of the jury, the D.C. jury, even considering the notion that he might be a legitimate journalist. You know what his big mistake was that day? In order to blend in with the crowd at one point, one time, all day long, after going to camp, he said 3 deadly words. He said, USA, USA, USA. For that reason right there, and that reason alone, he was not granted the designation of being a participant in the riot. And that's the guys that we're here to talk about, not just myself. My case has been being investigated, for at least 2.5 years, and we've heard the story, you've seen the press release, lots of talk about it. I don't need to bring you any more of that. I just want to say this in closing, is that we're going to continue doing the work, even if the Department of Justice decides to move forward, finally, then I'm not going to stop working. I'm not going to stop telling the stories that we're telling. I'm not going to stop telling the stories about January 6th. I'm not going to stop talking about the stories we know about the malfeasance coming out of the Department of Justice. I'm not going to stop talking about the stories. Stop revealing the information that we have, particularly related to the case 3 of these 4 gentlemen participated in a year and a quarter ago. We have the information that shows that the Oath Keepers have been members of the Capitol Police or officers of the Capitol Police on January 6, 2021 because of disciplinary actions that they had against them years ago that were suppressed, hidden, not given to the attorneys in discovering the Brady violations by the Department of Justice. I know Brad's a little bit nicer to him than I am. But we're going to be revealing these stories, these documents, this information. Like, not only should those officers not even have been officers on the force at that time, they should have never been allowed to testify. And at the very least, these guys behind me should have had that information so that they could impeach those testimonies when they gave them in trial. So we're not going to do that. Thank you guys so much for your time and listening to what we have to say today. My last message is directly to the Department of Justice. Let me do my job if you really believe in justice. If you really believe in the truth. Leave me alone. If not, if this is the fight you want, listen.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would just like to thank all of you for attending this press conference today. I particularly want to thank my friends James Lee Bright, Matthew Sarabini, Brad Goddard, and one and only Steve Baker for being here. Bill Shipley's not here, Philip Linder's not here. There are other attorneys that are part of this team. And I would just like to simply say this, that I don't think any of us ever thought that we would be standing in Dealey Plaza one day speaking out for the freedom of speech and the freedom of the press in this country. I don't think anybody ever thought we would be doing that. But we are here today. And this is about what kind of country we want to have. Whether or not we will have a country where the DOJ has been weaponized against the citizens, against independent journalists like Steve Baker, Stephen Horn, and J.D. Rivera. Okay, you've heard from Steve Baker today, and I just want you to know that we are honored. All of us are honored to stand here with him today and forward into the future, and to serve him in whatever we can in defending the freedom of speech and freedom of the press in this country. At this time, if any of you have any questions, I think that Mr. Baker or any of the others would be grateful to respond if anybody has any questions for any of us. Thank you.
So the question is, obviously, does any of my reporting help exonerate? It should. If we lived in a normal country right now, if we lived in, and these guys could probably speak to it better than I can, is that the reality is that you get two federal officers perjuring themselves in a trial against your client, and those convictions should, in my mind, be dismissed with prejudice. You know, retry them if you want to without those, but these guys should have been sitting at home right now for the last year and a half, or at least the last few months since I started rolling. That's my answer to that.
Steve, I think what's next for you is the investigation into what happened
From here, I go back to the Blaze Studios and I start writing another story.